Welcome, disciples of the internet, back to recreating Super Mario World and Super Mario Maker 2 on a questionable one-to-one basis. This time we are in Hellhole, West Virginia, also known as Vanilla Dome, the third, island of Super Mario World. Ignoring the few levels on the surface and this random house, the majority of this world takes place underground. But before we can get to these levels, I must repeat that if you haven't seen the first video of this new series, click on the provided reference card in the corner of the screen to view the first video of this program. And one more absolutely shameless promotion before the video begins, make sure to subscribe and toll the notification bell to view even more jelly-infused content. Vanilla Dome 1 starts off with a row of 5 swoops, and if you haven't seen the last video, I replaced these creatures with spinies, so it is most possible that you will take some points of damage while trying to traverse this area. For these open Koopa shells, I have now made the decision to use empty Buzzy Beetle shells as it does really fit the theme, just make sure not to put it on for peak authenticity. Entering this pipe leads to a cool sort of cinematic sequence where Mario needs to run on this yellow platform before it fully sinks into the lava. Ignore the lava that is now replaced with spike blocks, they basically serve the exact same gameplay purpose. And within said lava are some blars that jump out of the lava. You know what also jumps out of lava? Lava bubbles. Just ignore the spikes again. What I did for the moving platform itself is quite obvious since it takes up a lot of the screen. I put some bullet bill launchers on a copious amount of tracks, but yet again they load in at different times, so they have to jump multiple times while moving to the end. But it does add some artificial tensity, so you know, trade-offs and such. The second half of this level basically has nothing new to add, but there is the new addition of the super steep slope. Just use a 2-block steep staircase. There's not too much lost if you forget the super steep slope. Vanilla Secret 1 is a vertical cave level, which is cool, but the enemies in this level are kind of vanilla! There are simply just a few Koopa Paratroopas and 2 Boom Boom / Chargin' Chucks, but there is a new platform technically with the springy vine that sticks out of the wall. Now that the springs are exposed, Mario can just take them off the walls, but surprisingly enough, this is helpful as they are required for this one jump as normal springs don't bounce you as far in Mario Maker 2 as they do in Super Mario World. Vanilla Secret 2 is situated on a green mountain and starts out with a bale of Koopa Paratroopas, and there are some that are obviously stronger than others as they can jump much higher, and no, I will not add tracks for every Koopa that jumps slightly higher. This level is also cool as it features Lakitu in a pipe. We got Lakitu in a pipe before we even got normal Lakitu. But all he does is throw spinies out of a pipe, which can just be accomplished by having a normal pipe that produces spinies by itself. One more thing that has nothing to do with recreating the level itself, but there is the best Chargin' Chuck at the end of the level. The Mitosis Charging Chuck. Vanilla Secret 3 is quite boring in a platform aspect because they're mostly just semi-solids and some coin arrows. There are also these dolphins, so yes, that means the majority of this level's creation time will have to be spent on track arcs with differing heights. There's also this one other creature than the dolphins with this one porky puffer about halfway through the level. I simply put a giant sheep at that location, but now that the player can simply bounce on their head, it makes the level feel quite lonely. Vanilla Fortress, the first secret fortress, which is basically just a shorter castle type level that ends with Mario making the rhinoceros 4 steps closer to being extinct. The first section of this underwater fortress has some bony beetles near the end, and not much is lost from bringing them back to life. For the spikes that fall, icicles are quite convenient, but they do look slightly out of place when compared to the other quote-unquote spikes. For the second area, I elected to use ground blocks instead of hard blocks because the game physically stopped me from using more hard blocks. The Reznor fight itself is also quite tricky as there is no real way to have a moving 2-block wide platform that can be hit from underneath. So instead of bumping the bosses off their platform, the boss fight revolves around spin jumping and throwing them against each other. For the bridge that slowly disappears, donut blocks are a fine substitute, and for the Reznors I used Goombrats as they don't have any special abilities and will not move off their platforms. And to make sure the player kills every boss, each boss will have their own key, and there will be 4 key doors that the player will have to enter before they can finish the level. Vanilla Dome 2, this level starts off with some water, so that means the return of the jungle sub-area, and since there can only be one stagnant water level, the player starts off in a massive pool of water. Before this water section ends, there are some Chargin' Chucks that can break through these rows of blocks. Boom Boom is not that strong, however, so the player will have to crouch jump through these areas most of the time. There is a secret sub-area that has the return of the ever-present ice physics, but because we only have 2 sub-areas, this area loses all sense of intrigue as the only advantage to visiting this place is getting 17 coins. Red Switch Palace, yet another Switch Palace, so you already know the drill. In fact, that made the interlude section in the beginning much more interesting since this level is so boring. The first actual room has 4 different kinds of Koopas, which is a slap in the face to the 2 simple Koopas that I'm provided, and of course the Switch room is the same as it's always been. Vanilla Ghost House, the first ghost house with no secret exit to speak of, and the normal exit isn't even that well hidden. There are only 3 doors in the entire level, and it's basically just a straight shot to the end. I guess you could say this ghost house is quite The second room has another new enemy, I guess, with these big green bubbles that move in a sine wave pattern, so that basically means big boos on tracks throughout the entirety of the room.
The best kind of prize is a surprise.
Vanilla Dome 3 is a lot of content. The main level itself is quite long, and there are 2 sub-areas to go along with it. So for these sub-areas, they're gonna have to be shortened and put near the ceiling of the level, because there's simply no room anywhere else. The main gimmick of this level is the Skull Lava platform, which is thankfully in Mario Maker 2, and for the slopes, they can be put on tracks. However, there's one problem: the lifts don't last for long, and they eventually fall into the abyss. But if you change them to blue, they don't have this problem. However, blue skull lifts are much faster and have the unintentional side effect of making the level much harder than it rightfully should be. Vanilla Dome 4 is a level composed of semi-solids and bullet bills that spawn in from every side. Well, I cannot just place bullet bills anywhere without cannons, and in sections where 5 spawn at a time, track interference would be impossible to avoid. So Lord forgive me for what I must do. Now the bullets are much bigger, but also much slower, so you know, trade-offs. And now since the skull lifts are much faster, this sub-area is now one of the hardest sections in the entire game. Lemmy's castle consists of both lava and water, so there is no choice but to have one section be in the castle theme and one section be in the jungle theme. After the fairly tame starting section with Magic Koopas, there's this long corridor of moving platforms that dip in and out of the lava. Because of length restrictions, most of the lava will have to be replaced with a multitude of spikes dipped in the water. And for every single moving platform, there'll have to be bullet bill launchers, of course, filled with coins set on tracks. The loading time for each platform also makes this section much harder than it needs to be, but at least the boss fight is slightly easier. Lemmy cannot dip in and out of the pipes, but that doesn't mean the fake Koopalings cannot. Said fake Koopalings are now substituted with red Koopas that actually help make the fight easier, so you can throw their shells at Lemmy for extra hits of damage. And after a typical 3 hits, Lemmy is not only burned alive, but Mario methodically destroys this entire compound with a hammer. I hope you've enjoyed the creation of all 11 levels in Vanilla Dome from Super Mario World to Mario Maker 2, and before the video can end, it is time for the ranking of the levels featured in this video. Number 11, Vanilla Dome 3. Number 10, Lemmy's Castle. Number 9, Vanilla Fortress. Number 8, Vanilla Dome 1. Number 7, Vanilla Secret 3. Number 6, Vanilla Dome 4. Number 5, Vanilla Dome 2. Number 4, Vanilla Ghost House. Number 3, Red Switch Palace. Number 2, Vanilla Secret 2. And number 1, Vanilla Secret 1. I sincerely hope you've enjoyed the perfect recreation of Hellhole, West Virginia, and if you subscribed and want to view similar content or just random jelly-soaked sleep paralysis demon fuel, stick around.